In the world of military leaders, few are as iconic, as controversial, and as revered as General George S. Patton. Known for his bold tactics, aggressive leadership, and relentless pursuit of victory, Patton was a commander who defied convention and redefined the art of warfare, especially tank warfare. His legacy, both as a tactician and a personality, continues to influence military strategy today. But before Patton became a household name in World War II, he had already carved his path to greatness through the experiences and hardships that shaped his character and views on warfare. In this video, we will explore the life of General George S. Patton from his early years to his rise through the ranks of the U.S. Army, to his critical role in the Allied victory in Europe. His story is not just one of military genius, but of perseverance, ambition, and controversy. George Smith Patton Jr. was born on November 11, 1885, in San Gabriel, California, into a family with a long history of military service. Patton's great-grandfather had fought in the Mexican-American War, and his grandfather had served in the Civil War, so it was almost inevitable that George would follow in their footsteps. From a young age, Patton exhibited an intense passion for military history and a deep desire to serve his country. In 1904, Patton entered the United States Military Academy at West Point, one of the most prestigious military institutions in the world. At West Point, Patton was known for his competitive nature and his drive to succeed. Although he wasn't at the top of his class academically, he excelled in the physical and leadership aspects of military training. His obsession with the history of warfare, particularly the military tactics of Napoleon Bonaparte, would shape his future strategies and leadership style. Graduating from West Point in 1909, Patton was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. cavalry. His early career in the cavalry gave him valuable experience in the field and an understanding of mounted combat. However, Patton's vision of modern warfare extended beyond the cavalry. He quickly recognized the potential of mechanized warfare and tanks, which would later become his signature. Patton's first real test came during World War I, where he served in France as part of the American Expeditionary Force, AEF. Although the U.S. had only recently entered the war, Patton wasted no time in establishing himself as a determined and innovative officer. He was assigned to the newly formed U.S. Tank Corps, an experimental unit focused on the use of tanks on the battlefield, something that had not yet been fully explored. Patton's leadership in World War I was instrumental in developing the U.S. Army's tactics for tank warfare. He led the first American tank attack in history during the Battle of Saint-Mihiel in 1918. His success in commanding tanks on the battlefield, as well as his tactical thinking, caught the attention of his superiors. He was promoted to major and given more responsibility within the U.S. Tank Corps. Although the tank was still a new and untested weapon, Patton saw its potential. He believed that tanks could be used to break the deadlock of trench warfare, cutting through enemy lines and providing mobility that infantry could not achieve. His enthusiasm for the potential of tanks became one of the cornerstones of his military philosophy. Despite his successes, Patton's behavior was often described as erratic and impulsive. He was known for his fiery temper, his relentless drive, and his unyielding ambition. These qualities would serve him well in battle, but they also caused friction with his superiors. Nevertheless, Patton's accomplishments in World War I established him as a rising star in the U.S. Army, and his fascination with tanks only deepened. After the war ended in 1918, Patton continued his military career, but it was during the interwar years that his ideas on mechanized warfare began to take shape. Following the war, the U.S. Army was in a state of disarray. The country had demobilized and the military was downsized significantly. Tanks, which had played such a pivotal role in the war, were seen by many as an outdated weapon in peacetime. But Patton disagreed. During the 1920s and 1930s, Patton pushed for the development of tanks as the centerpiece of future warfare. He recognized the importance of armored warfare, and he worked tirelessly to promote the idea that tanks should be the backbone of the U.S. Army. He became an advocate for the development of faster, more mobile tanks, and he also championed the creation of specialized tank units within the Army. One of Patton's most significant contributions during this period was his development of tank tactics. He argued that tanks should be used in a way that allowed them to operate independently from infantry and cavalry units, conducting their own operations with speed and surprise. His ideas about tank warfare were revolutionary, but at the time they were not widely accepted. The military establishment was still focused on traditional methods of warfare, and Patton's ideas were considered radical. However, Patton's persistence paid off. In the 1930s, as tensions in Europe began to rise, the United States began to rearm. Patton was given more responsibility, and his vision of mechanized warfare was finally beginning to gain traction. Following the victory in Europe and the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany in May 1945, General George S. Patton was a figure who embodied both the triumphs and the controversies of modern warfare. After years of leading his men with unmatched audacity and aggression, his role in the post-war landscape was surprisingly subdued. Patton was sidelined by the U.S. military leadership, primarily due to his outspoken views on the Soviet Union and his blunt criticisms of fellow commanders. Despite his incredible success in the field and his prominence as one of the key figures in the Allied victory in Europe, Patton found himself pushed aside as the war ended. His controversial statements about the Soviet Union, his refusal to embrace the peaceful post-war order, and his desire to confront the Soviet threat head-on made him an uncomfortable figure for some of his superiors. However, his legacy as a military strategist, his groundbreaking use of tank warfare, and his relentless pursuit of victory would continue to inspire military leaders for generations. On December 9, 1945, Patton was injured in a car accident while traveling in Germany, where he had been overseeing the post-war occupation. His injuries, though initially non-life-threatening, eventually led to complications. Patton died from those complications on December 21, 1945, just months after the end of the war. The circumstances surrounding his death have been the subject of speculation. Some believed that Patton's outspoken views on post-war politics, particularly his criticism of Soviet expansion, might have made him a target of those who wanted him silenced. But whether it was an unfortunate accident or something more sinister, Patton's sudden death left a void in the military leadership that could never truly be filled. Despite his relatively short life and the controversy surrounding his post-war career, Patton's impact on military history is undeniable. His strategies, especially his innovative use of tanks, would come to define modern warfare. Patton was one of the first military leaders to understand the full potential of armored warfare and mobility. His belief in the importance of speed and surprise on the battlefield would shape military doctrines in the decades that followed. Patton's legacy lived on in the men he led and the soldiers who respected him. The sheer audacity and force of his character inspired countless others to lead with conviction, to never back down in the face of adversity, and to always believe that victory was within reach. His aggressive leadership during the pivotal moments of World War II, such as the invasion of Sicily, the Normandy breakout, and the relief of Bastogne, set the standard for military excellence. In the years following the war, Patton's ideas on modern warfare, particularly the use of tanks and mechanized forces, became integral to U.S. military strategy. His theories on fast, mobile warfare, combined with his belief in maintaining the initiative and keeping the enemy off balance, were adopted by subsequent generations of military leaders. Patton was not just a commander, he was a visionary who understood the evolving nature of combat. Patton's career didn't just impact World War II, it also had implications for the early years of the Cold War. While his death occurred just as tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were beginning to escalate, his belief in confronting the Soviets head-on was prophetic. Patton famously said that the United States would eventually have to confront the Soviet Union in a Third World War, a prediction that many believed came true during the Cold War period. Patton's focus on maintaining military superiority through mechanized and armored forces laid the foundation for U.S. military strategy during the early years of the Cold War. The use of tanks, armored divisions, and rapid maneuvers in the face of a potential Soviet threat became central to NATO's defense strategy in Europe. His emphasis on combat readiness and his refusal to shy away from confrontation would resonate throughout the military decisions of the 1950s and 1960s. Even today, the Patton myth endures. His larger-than-life persona, combined with his achievements on the battlefield, has cemented his place as one of the most iconic military leaders in history. Patton became a symbol of American grit, determination, and the will to win, regardless of the odds. His image as a fearless tank commander, always on the move and leading his troops into battle, became ingrained in the cultural memory of the United States. His speeches, full of bravado and enthusiasm, continue to inspire leaders and military personnel. The famous lines from his speech, such as, "We're not just going to shoot the enemy, we're going to kill them," are quoted as examples of his unwavering commitment to victory. Patton's speeches, full of high energy and unfiltered conviction, continue to capture the essence of his leadership style, bold, daring, and unrelenting. His contributions to the military leadership of the U.S. Army, particularly in mechanized warfare and tank tactics, remain central to the training of modern military leaders. His doctrines are still studied in military academies, and his tactical innovations have been incorporated into modern military operations. The U.S. Army's reliance on mechanized and rapid response forces during the Cold War and beyond was, in part, the result of Patton's influence. Patton's cultural impact extends beyond the military. His life has been immortalized in popular culture, especially in the 1970 film Patton, starring George C. Scott, which brought the general's story to the big screen. The film, which won multiple Academy Awards, portrays Patton as both a heroic and flawed leader, capturing his brilliance, his flaws, and his controversial personality. The movie brought Patton's story to a new generation and helped solidify his place in American history. Books, documentaries, and even documentaries made about Patton continue to explore his life, leadership, and legacy. Patton, Ordeal and Triumph, a biography written by his daughter, Beatrice Patton, sheds light on his personal life and his complex relationship with his family. Another widely read book, The Patton Papers, includes his correspondence and writings, giving further insight into his thoughts on leadership, war, and life. General George S. Patton may have passed away in 1945, but his legacy remains as vibrant and influential today as it was during his lifetime. His contributions to modern warfare, his leadership during some of the most significant battles of World War II, and his personality all contribute to his enduring status as one of the most iconic military leaders in history. Patton's boldness, his innovation in tank warfare, and his relentless pursuit of victory continue to inspire not just military leaders, but anyone who faces adversity and aims to succeed against overwhelming odds. Patton's story is one of perseverance, courage, and the willingness to face down the impossible. He was a man of contradictions, both a brilliant strategist and a controversial figure. But in the end, Patton's legend lives on, not only through his victories on the battlefield, but through the lessons he imparted on leadership, war, and the unbreakable will to win. General George S. Patton was a man of many contradictions. To some, he was a larger-than-life hero, a fearless leader who inspired his troops to achieve the impossible. To others, he was a stubborn, arrogant, and sometimes reckless figure who alienated those around him with his boldness and unyielding nature. His leadership style was as intense and controversial as his personality. Patton's charisma was undeniable. He had an aura of confidence that was infectious, and his troops admired him for his energy, his enthusiasm, and his ability to lead from the front. Patton never asked his men to do anything that he was not willing to do himself. Whether it was charging into battle or making dangerous maneuvers with his tanks, Patton was always in the thick of the action, leading by example. However, his leadership style was also divisive. Patton's famous temper and unfiltered language often led to clashes with his fellow officers. His refusal to follow protocol, his constant need for the spotlight, and his tendency to make rash decisions made him a difficult figure for some to work with. Yet, despite the controversy, Patton's leadership proved effective in combat. His men respected him because he was direct, honest, and unwavering in his commitment to victory. Patton believed in the power of speed, aggression, and initiative. He was one of the first military leaders to recognize the importance of mechanized warfare, tanks, artillery, and air power working together to strike the enemy quickly and decisively. His tactics focused on outflanking the enemy, breaking through their defenses, and keeping them off balance with rapid maneuvers. He had little patience for static warfare or prolonged sieges. To him, victory could only be achieved through aggressive action. His famous speeches, often laced with bravado and fiery rhetoric, were designed to motivate his men to fight with passion and determination. One of his most memorable lines was, "Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser." It's a quote that encapsulates Patton's belief in the power of self-belief, the idea that victory was not just a possibility, but an expectation. Patton's speeches became legendary, with his delivery electrifying his soldiers. He understood the importance of morale and knew that words, when spoken with conviction, could inspire a nation to fight. He often used the power of emotional appeal to ignite the fighting spirit in his men, painting a picture of victory that was within their reach if they only pushed hard enough. However, Patton's unconventional methods sometimes led to controversy. One of the most infamous incidents that would haunt his career occurred during the Sicilian campaign in 1943, when Patton slapped two soldiers suffering from battle fatigue. The soldiers had been hospitalized for what was then known as shell shock, and Patton, in his characteristic manner, reprimanded them for what he viewed as cowardice. The incident was widely criticized and nearly cost Patton his command. Patton's harsh treatment of soldiers, particularly those who showed signs of mental distress, would become a dark chapter in his legacy. Despite the incident, Patton's commitment to the war effort remained undiminished, and he continued to lead his troops with fierce determination. One of the most enduring aspects of Patton's legacy is his ability to inspire those around him through his speeches. Patton understood the importance of motivating his troops, especially during moments of intense conflict. His speeches were famous for their raw emotion, their sense of urgency, and their call to action. Perhaps the most famous of Patton's speeches was the one he delivered to his troops before the invasion of France following D-Day. In it, he encouraged his soldiers with a powerful message of confidence and pride. "There's only one thing that matters now, gentlemen, and that's victory. We're going to fight on until we have destroyed the enemy, until we have conquered all of Europe. We're going to make them regret ever crossing us." Patton's speeches were not just about rallying his men for battle, they were about instilling a sense of purpose and pride in what they were doing. He saw war as a test of character, and his speeches were meant to forge stronger bonds between his soldiers, to make them believe in the mission and in their own abilities. Another memorable speech was delivered just before the Battle of the Bulge, when Patton's troops were called to halt the German offensive. In a speech filled with his trademark swagger and confidence, he told his men, "We are not here to die for our country. We are here to make the other poor bastard die for his country, and we're going to make them regret they ever started this damn war." This speech, like so many of his others, was a mix of tough love, irreverence, and unflinching confidence. It worked. His men were motivated and inspired by Patton's words, knowing that their commander believed in them and their ability to win. His speeches became legendary and were often quoted by those who served under him. Patton's legacy, like his personality, is a complex mix of admiration and controversy. To this day, he is remembered as one of the most uncompromising and fearless military leaders in history. His ability to lead soldiers, his tactical brilliance, and his role in the Allied victory in Europe are widely celebrated. Yet, his often abrasive personality, his tendency to challenge authority, and his controversial decisions left a more complicated legacy. Patton's leadership, both in and out of battle, is still studied in military academies around the world. His use of tanks and mechanized warfare became the blueprint for modern military strategies. His ideas about speed, mobility, and the psychological aspects of warfare continue to influence military thinking. His contributions to tank warfare, in particular, revolutionized the way tanks were used in modern combat. But while Patton's military brilliance is undeniable, his personality flaws remain part of his legacy. His clashes with his superiors, particularly with General Dwight D. Eisenhower, and his moments of recklessness, including the famous slapping incident, meant that his career was marked by both extraordinary achievements and significant controversies. Despite this, the Patton myth has endured. In the years following the war, Patton became a symbol of the American fighting spirit, determined, bold, and relentless. His image as a warrior, a man who would stop at nothing to win, became synonymous with the U.S. Army's strength and tenacity during World War II. Patton's life may have been tragically cut short by an accident, but his legacy has only grown in stature. His contributions to the Allied victory in World War II were immense. His leadership in key battles, his revolutionary tactics in tank warfare, and his unflinching determination are what make him one of the most iconic generals in history. He remains a symbol of American bravery, innovation, and leadership, qualities that continue to inspire military leaders and everyday people alike. The impact of Patton's vision for modern warfare, particularly armored warfare, cannot be overstated. He understood early on that the future of combat lay not in traditional infantry tactics, but in mobility, speed, and the use of mechanized units. His influence can still be seen in the way modern armies are structured today. General George S. Patton may have passed away before he could see the full extent of his impact, but his legacy continues to live on in the world of military strategy and beyond. He was, in every sense of the word, a true pioneer, pushing the limits of warfare, leadership, and what it meant to fight for victory. General George S. Patton was a man who lived, fought, and died for his country. His story is one of remarkable courage, audacity, and vision. He was a man who saw the future of warfare before anyone else and was willing to risk everything to shape it. Whether you admire him for his tactical brilliance or criticize him for his flaws, there's no denying that his legacy is one of the most enduring in the history of modern warfare. Patton's influence is still felt today, not only in the way wars are fought, but in the way leaders are made. He proved that leadership is not about playing it safe. It's about making bold, courageous decisions even when the odds are against you. And in the end, that's what makes him truly unforgettable. Though General George S. Patton died in December 1945, his influence on military strategy and global geopolitics did not end with his passing. In fact, many of Patton's predictions regarding post-war Europe would become startlingly prophetic. As the Soviet Union emerged as the United States' main adversary in the early years of the Cold War, Patton's vision for confronting the Soviet threat began to resonate even more strongly. Patton had always been outspoken about his disdain for the Soviet Union, even during the war. He believed that Stalin's intentions were expansionist and that the USSR was a dangerous force that had to be stopped before it spread across Europe. Patton, who had been deeply influenced by his experiences in World War I and his direct interactions with Soviet forces in Eastern Europe, recognized the growing power of the Soviet Union long before many of his contemporaries. His frustration with his commander's reluctance to confront the USSR head-on, particularly after the Nazis were defeated, was evident. In 1945, as the war in Europe ended, Patton's frustration mounted over the Allies' reluctance to confront the Soviets. He had fought alongside the British and French to defeat Nazi Germany, but now, instead of focusing on the growing Soviet presence in Eastern Europe, the Allies were eager to embrace the USSR as a wartime ally. Patton, however, understood the dangers of appeasement. He believed that the Soviet Union had ambitions far beyond the European theater. He was vocal about his desire to confront the Soviets sooner rather than later. One of his most famous and controversial remarks came when he suggested that the U.S. should collaborate with Nazi forces in Eastern Europe to fight the Soviets. Patton's proposal to turn former Nazi soldiers against the Soviet Union was met with vehement opposition from his superiors, including General Dwight D. Eisenhower and Harry Truman. The Patton controversy centered around his refusal to acknowledge the Cold War as the real threat and his unwillingness to accept that the U.S. had to focus on a post-war order that included Soviet influence. In his letters and diaries, Patton expressed his belief that, once the war in Europe ended, the U.S. would inevitably be locked in a conflict with the Soviet Union. He even wrote that the real war would come soon after Nazi Germany was defeated. Patton's vision of the future was not one of peace, but of a prolonged struggle against Soviet imperialism, which he believed would lead to World War III unless it was confronted quickly. Although Patton's post-war career was cut short by his untimely death, his tactical legacy lived on in the U.S. Army's approach to Cold War strategy. Patton's emphasis on armored warfare, rapid mobility, and surprise maneuvers became cornerstones of U.S. military doctrine during the early stages of the Cold War. His ideas about the use of tanks and mechanized forces as the backbone of modern combat were adopted by subsequent military leaders. Patton's vision of tank warfare was especially influential during the Korean War, 1950–1953, and in NATO defense strategies in the 1950s and 1960s. The U.S. Army's reliance on armored divisions and the doctrine of deep battle, coordinating tanks, infantry, artillery, and air power in a seamless, rapid offensive, were strategies influenced directly by Patton's experiences and writings. During the Cold War, the U.S. Army used a combination of nuclear weapons, conventional forces, and the latest in mechanized warfare to prepare for a potential Soviet invasion of Europe. Patton's focus on creating an army that was highly mobile, quick to respond, and capable of engaging in fluid combat was central to NATO's military preparedness throughout the Cold War era. Patton's ideas also impacted the development of U.S. tank tactics, including the design and implementation of new tanks like the M48 Patton tank. The tanks designed and used by the U.S. Army in the Cold War were inspired by the doctrines that Patton helped to popularize during World War II. Even though Patton himself did not live to see the Cold War, his influence on U.S. military doctrine and the use of armored forces remains a key part of his legacy. Patton's larger-than-life persona ensured that his influence transcended military strategy. In the years following his death, Patton became a symbol of American resolve, courage, and uncompromising leadership. His image as a soldier who never backed down in the face of adversity resonated deeply with the American public, and his wartime achievements became integral to the identity of post-war America. The 1970 film Patton, starring George C. Scott, cemented the general's status as an iconic American figure. The film, which won multiple Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Scott, portrayed Patton as both a heroic and controversial leader. The film's portrayal of Patton's speeches, especially the famous scene where he addresses his troops before battle, helped revive interest in Patton's life and his military career. In addition to the film, Patton became a symbol of American patriotism and the idea of American exceptionalism, the belief that the U.S. could lead the world in battle and triumph over its enemies, no matter how insurmountable the challenge. Patton's image as a fierce warrior who never gave up in the face of overwhelming odds became ingrained in American culture, and he was often cited as an example of the American fighting spirit. Patton's final resting place is at the Luxembourg American Cemetery and Memorial, where he is buried alongside other American soldiers who died during the war. The cemetery, located near the town of Luxembourg, honors the thousands of U.S. military personnel who gave their lives in Europe during World War II. Patton's grave is marked by a simple, dignified headstone, but it remains a place of pilgrimage for those who wish to pay tribute to one of the most legendary military figures in American history. Patton's legacy has lived on in numerous books, documentaries, films, and military analyses. Patton, Ordeal and Triumph, by Beatrice Patton, his daughter, gives a personal insight into his life and military career, while other biographies such as The Patton Papers have provided more detailed accounts of his leadership philosophy. His life continues to be studied at military academies around the world, where his tactics and leadership style are analyzed as a critical part of military history. The Patton myth endures in the United States. His influence on American military thought and his image as a leader who never backed down continue to inspire generations of soldiers and leaders. General George S. Patton was more than just a military commander. He was a symbol of unyielding leadership and a reminder of the values that shaped the United States during World War II and the Cold War. His tactical genius, his audacity on the battlefield, and his commitment to victory in the face of adversity left an indelible mark on military history. His legacy, though controversial, continues to inspire and inform military strategy and leadership today. Patton's story is one of triumph and tragedy, of brilliance and flaws, but above all, it is a story of perseverance, a story of a man who believed in the power of the human spirit to overcome all odds. General George S. Patton's name will forever be synonymous with courage, vision, and the relentless pursuit of victory. His influence extends beyond the battlefield. He is a symbol of the very best qualities in leadership: boldness, vision, and a refusal to accept failure. As long as there are soldiers, leaders, and nations who must make difficult choices in times of war, Patton's story will remain a beacon of what it means to lead with courage and conviction. One of the most enduring aspects of General George S. Patton's legacy is his revolution in tank warfare. While tanks had been used in World War I, it was during World War II that tanks were transformed into a primary weapon of combat, and Patton's innovative use of them in battle reshaped military tactics across the globe. Patton was a visionary when it came to armored warfare. Before World War II, tanks were seen as support units for infantry, but Patton saw them as the main force of an army. His understanding of tank warfare was grounded in speed, mobility, and overwhelming force. He did not believe in using tanks in static defensive positions. Instead, he envisioned tanks as tools for breakthrough operations, punching through enemy lines and creating chaos within their ranks. One of his most notable contributions to tank warfare came during the Normandy invasion in 1944. After the success of D-Day, Patton led the Third Army in a breakout through France, driving fast and hard into Germany. His forces advanced more than 100 miles in just a few days, liberating towns and cities along the way. This was a direct result of Patton's belief that tanks should be used aggressively to maintain momentum, exploit gaps in the enemy line, and prevent them from reorganizing. His use of tanks as a rapid response force proved to be a decisive factor in the Allied success. Patton's strategies in tank warfare influenced military tactics for decades. His emphasis on speed and surprise would become a cornerstone of U.S. military operations during the Cold War, where armored divisions became the mainstay of NATO's defensive strategy. Even today, Patton's use of combined arms, where tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support work in tandem, is a key element of modern military doctrine. Patton's influence didn't stop with tanks. His broader vision of mechanized warfare and modern combat left an indelible mark on military strategy well beyond World War II. In many ways, Patton was the first to truly understand the nature of modern warfare, where speed, mobility, and technological advancements would become the defining features of military success. In the post-war years, the U.S. military embraced many of Patton's tactics. The development of modern armored divisions, mobile artillery, and advanced air support all owe a debt to Patton's strategies in World War II. His belief in the integration of different military branches into a cohesive fighting force was ahead of its time. The success of the Persian Gulf War in 1991, for example, echoed Patton's principles of fast-moving operations and the use of technology to overwhelm the enemy. Patton also introduced the idea of the instant response force, which involved the ability to deploy forces quickly and decisively at a moment's notice. This concept would be used by military leaders across the globe to ensure that combat units could move quickly in the face of changing battle conditions. Patton's legacy in modern warfare is often subtle, but his tactical innovations continue to shape the U.S. military's approach to combat. From the tank-focused strategies of Desert Storm to today's armored warfare in the U.S. Army, Patton's vision remains alive in the field of modern military tactics. While many of Patton's contemporaries looked to the future of post-war recovery, Patton saw a world where the United States would face new threats, most notably the Soviet Union. As the war in Europe concluded, Patton's attention turned eastward toward the WWII rising influence of the Soviet Empire. His famous belief that the United States would eventually find itself in a Third World War against the USSR set him apart from his peers. In the years following Germany's surrender, Patton spoke openly about his concerns regarding Soviet expansion in Eastern Europe. He feared that the post-war geopolitical landscape would see the USSR continue its march toward global dominance. Patton, ever the strategist, believed that the Soviet Union needed to be contained and that the US could not afford to simply let it be. He argued that the West's decision to divide Germany and allow the Soviets to control parts of Eastern Europe would lead to an inevitable confrontation. Patton's frustration with the political and military leadership after the war was palpable. His insistence that the U.S. should act immediately to confront Soviet forces, especially in Europe, was seen by many as reckless. In private conversations, Patton advocated for an alliance with former Nazis to counter the growing Soviet threat, a position that drew ire from many of his colleagues. Patton's Cold War foresight was largely ignored, but his belief in early intervention against rising global threats would echo through American military policy during the Cold War. Although Patton didn't live to see the Iron Curtain fall across Europe, his views on the Soviet threat were remarkably prescient. After World War II, Patton was assigned to oversee the U.S. occupation of Germany. His task was to help rebuild the nation and to manage the post-war transition. But Patton's approach to Germany's future was starkly different from that of his contemporaries. Patton believed that Germany should be treated as an ally in the fight against Soviet expansion rather than being punished or crippled. He strongly opposed the denazification efforts that aimed to purge German society of former Nazis. He argued that many of the best minds in Germany had been associated with the Nazi Party and that stripping Germany of its intellectual capital would weaken it as a counterforce to Soviet influence. This controversial stance led to significant friction between Patton and the U.S. administration. Patton's views on post-war Germany were controversial, and he was criticized for his leniency toward former Nazis. Many saw his policies as naive or even dangerous, particularly given the atrocities committed during the war. However, Patton's belief in rebuilding Germany to serve as a bulwark against Soviet aggression reflected his larger vision for global power dynamics in the years to come. Patton's post-war role was brief, but his influence on U.S. foreign policy and military strategy in the early Cold War years cannot be overstated. His insistence on acting decisively against the Soviet Union, his unflinching belief in the importance of a strong, independent Germany, and his tactical innovations helped shape the U.S. military approach to global conflict. Patton's vision also extended beyond military strategy. His understanding of the psychological and moral aspects of leadership played a significant role in shaping the American military's approach to post-war engagements. He was one of the first to recognize that the mentality and spirit of soldiers would shape future conflicts, and this insight became integral to how American forces engaged in the subsequent decades of the Cold War. General George S. Patton remains an enduring symbol of leadership in the military world. His courage, decisiveness, and unwillingness to back down in the face of danger made him one of the most admired leaders of the 20th century. But beyond his tactical genius, it was his leadership qualities that continue to inspire military leaders today. Patton's confidence in himself and his troops was unmatched. He believed that leadership was not about popularity or being liked. It was about achieving victory at any cost. He famously stated, "Lead me, follow me, or get out of my way." His leadership was not about perfection, but about determination and commitment to achieving the goal. His visionary approach to leadership, combining courage, boldness, and deep knowledge of his troops, set the standard for modern military leadership. Patton's legacy continues to inspire military professionals worldwide. His belief in the power of decisive action and his constant pursuit of excellence set the foundation for leadership that transcends the battlefield. Patton's tactical brilliance remains a core part of modern military education. His writings, speeches, and battle plans continue to be studied in military academies around the world. His use of armored warfare, combined arms tactics, and focus on mobility are seen as key lessons in the way modern armies fight. The U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and various international military institutions incorporate Patton's tactics and leadership principles into their training programs. His methods, especially his focus on using speed and shock tactics to overwhelm the enemy, are integral to understanding modern warfare and military decision-making. General George S. Patton's life was one of extraordinary achievement, fierce controversy, and lasting influence. He redefined military strategy and leadership, proving that speed, boldness, and a refusal to accept defeat could turn the tide of battle. Patton's legacy is not just in his victories on the battlefield, but in his visionary approach to modern warfare, his undying commitment to victory, and his uncompromising leadership. Whether admired or criticized, Patton's name remains synonymous with the American fighting spirit. His story is one of a man who defied expectations, broke barriers, and led with a courage and confidence that inspired generations. His life and career remind us that leadership is not about perfection. It's about the will to keep fighting, even when the odds are stacked against us. While General Patton's battlefield legacy is widely acknowledged, his vision for the post-war world and his forward-thinking perspective on military strategy were also a significant part of his influence. After the defeat of Nazi Germany, Patton's thoughts turned to the political landscape and the U.S. Army's future in a new global order. It was during this period that his outspoken remarks about the Soviet Union and post-war Europe started to paint a picture of a world soon to be divided by ideological lines. Patton was deeply concerned with the rapid expansion of the Soviet Union's influence over Eastern Europe. Unlike many other Allied leaders who saw the USSR as a partner in peace, Patton viewed Stalin's Soviet regime as an extension of the Nazi ideology. He worried that the United States, distracted by the end of the war and the post-war rebuilding, would fail to confront the Soviets effectively. In his letters and conversations, Patton argued that the Soviet Union had no interest in coexisting with the West. Instead, he saw a future where a Third World War would be inevitable, with the Soviet Union as the primary adversary. His analysis of the Soviets was based not just on military strategy, but on the assumption that Stalin would not stop at the borders of Eastern Europe. He believed that Stalin had imperial ambitions that extended to much of Europe and beyond. Patton's viewpoint, however, was largely dismissed. His outspokenness on such issues was not well received by many of the political and military leaders in the U.S. and Britain. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, in particular, disagreed with Patton's perspective and instead worked toward building a cooperative peace with the USSR. Patton's stance was seen as provocative and alarmist, but as the Cold War began to take shape, many of his warnings began to appear more prescient. His outspoken belief that Germany should not be punished but instead rebuilt as a bulwark against Soviet influence also went against the prevailing political sentiment of the time. While the U.S. government was focused on denazification and punishing war criminals, Patton advocated for the restoration of Germany's military capability, at least in the form of a defensive force that could stand against the Soviets. This stance put him in direct opposition to the post-war policies of the U.S. military and the Western Allies. Patton's controversial political views extended far beyond his military career. His open criticism of Soviet expansionism and his public desire for a stronger U.S. military presence in Europe placed him in the crosshairs of U.S. leadership. He was dismissed from his post as the governor of Bavaria, as military and political leaders saw him as a loose cannon who could jeopardize international peace. Yet, Patton's Cold War predictions were ultimately vindicated. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union began to unfold in earnest just a few years after his death, and the division of Europe and the rise of nuclear tensions were some of the very issues Patton had foreseen. His boldness, however controversial, was matched by an unmatched vision of military necessity, one that recognized global threats before they became visible to others. Patton's desire to confront the Soviet Union head-on was motivated not just by political foresight, but by his profound understanding of military strategy. He knew that failure to contain the USSR's power early on would lead to a long and costly global conflict. But the political environment in the post-war era was not aligned with Patton's vision. As such, his ideas about preemptive action and aggressive defense against the Soviet Union were largely sidelined. Another key aspect of Patton's legacy that has been universally acknowledged is his groundbreaking approach to tank warfare. Patton's vision for tanks as the centerpiece of modern warfare was ahead of its time, and he played a pivotal role in the development of mechanized warfare. He believed that tanks were not simply support units for infantry, but the primary striking force of an army. His use of tanks during the North African campaign, the Sicilian invasion, and the Normandy breakout changed the way wars would be fought for decades to come. The U.S. Army's reliance on armored units in future conflicts, such as the Korean War and even the Vietnam War, can be traced back to Patton's insistence on the importance of armored warfare in achieving rapid, decisive victories. His strategic approach to tank battles was based on speed and mobility. Unlike the infantry-heavy strategies of previous conflicts, Patton's use of tanks in combined arms operations, where tanks, infantry, and artillery would work together in a fluid, fast-moving attack, became the template for modern armored warfare. This approach was instrumental in breaking through German defenses in Normandy and creating gaps in their lines that would lead to their ultimate defeat. Patton's contributions to armored doctrine were critical in shaping future tank strategies. His work directly influenced the development of tank tactics that would become standard in modern combat. Patton's focus on speed, flexibility, and surprise is still central to modern mechanized operations, especially in conflicts that require the rapid deployment of forces. The principles of tank warfare that Patton advocated for, combined with his belief in independent armored units, were incorporated into NATO's Cold War strategies. The M48 Patton tank, named in his honor, remained in service throughout the 1950s and 1960s and became an iconic symbol of post-war U.S. military power. Patton's emphasis on fast-moving mechanized units was a precursor to the U.S. Army's Gulf War doctrine, where armored divisions like the Bradley fighting vehicle played an essential role in offensive operations. Patton's military career was marked by his fearless leadership and his ability to inspire his troops. His never say die attitude became a hallmark of his persona, and it was something that set him apart from many of his contemporaries. He was often described as a man of extremes, passionate and aggressive in battle, but also deeply reflective in moments of solitude. His leadership and larger-than-life persona made Patton a mythic figure, not just within the U.S. military, but also in popular culture. His speeches, his actions on the battlefield, and his larger-than-life character became symbols of American military might. Hollywood captured this legend with the film Patton, starring George C. Scott, which portrayed the general's dynamic personality and controversial leadership style. But even with all the glamorization, Patton remained a complex figure. His flaws, his outspoken nature, his harsh treatment of soldiers, and his insistence on unconventional methods only added to the mystique. In a way, Patton's controversy became an essential part of the narrative, giving his legacy a depth that goes beyond his achievements as a military commander. Patton was buried in the Luxembourg American Cemetery alongside 5,000 other American soldiers who perished in World War II. His final resting place is simple, yet it speaks volumes about the man he was. A man of great accomplishment who lived and died with his boots on the battlefield and whose legacy would endure far beyond his death. Patton's life and career, both triumphant and controversial, remain an indelible part of military history. Whether loved or loathed, his contributions to the strategy of modern warfare, particularly armored combat, ensured that his name would never be forgotten. His teachings are still part of military doctrine today, and his influence is felt across generations of soldiers and leaders who study his life, leadership, and tactics. Patton's death in 1945 did not diminish his impact. If anything, it solidified his place in history. From his innovations in tank warfare to his controversial views on post-war Europe and his unwavering commitment to victory, Patton's legacy is one that continues to inspire. In the years that followed, his name would remain synonymous with the idea of the warrior leader, a man who led with courage, vision, and an unrelenting will to win. General George S. Patton's legacy is a fascinating story of a man whose vision, courage, and leadership shaped the course of history. From his early days in the military through the North African campaign, Sicilian invasion, and the Normandy breakout, to his leadership during the Battle of the Bulge, Patton demonstrated an unwavering commitment to victory. His unorthodox methods and bold personality earned him both admiration and controversy. But there's no denying his monumental impact on World War II and military strategy as a whole. Patton's influence on modern warfare, especially tank tactics, mobile warfare, and leadership strategies, has persisted for generations. His story is not only one of military brilliance, but also a story of a man who understood the nature of war, the demands of leadership, and the price of victory. As long as military history is studied, Patton's name will live on as a symbol of unwavering courage, tactical genius, and the American fighting spirit. He remains an iconic figure whose contributions to modern warfare and military leadership will never be forgotten. Beyond the battlefield, General George S. Patton was a man of great complexity. Known for his boldness in combat, his equally forceful personality shaped his personal life in ways that were just as memorable as his military campaigns. Patton's personality and leadership style were often inseparable from his personal beliefs and values, and his relationships with those around him were shaped by the same traits that made him such a compelling figure on the battlefield, a combination of intensity, ambition, and a strong sense of purpose. Despite his fame as a soldier, Patton was deeply influenced by his upbringing. He was born into a family with a long history of military service, and this sense of duty and commitment to country was instilled in him from a young age. His father, a strict and demanding figure, pushed Patton to pursue excellence in all areas of his life, including his academics and sports. This upbringing contributed to Patton's perfectionist nature, his drive for achievement, and his constant desire to push himself and others to their limits. Patton's personal life was also shaped by his deep spirituality. He was a man of faith, and his religious convictions were an integral part of his identity. Patton often turned to his faith in times of personal crisis or stress, finding solace in his belief in a higher purpose. However, this spirituality also manifested in some contradictions. While he professed a belief in divine providence, he also exhibited a fierce ruthlessness on the battlefield, pushing his men to their limits and demanding unwavering loyalty. His relationship with his wife, Beatrice Ayer, was one of the few stable aspects of Patton's personal life. The two were married in 1910, and although their relationship was often strained by Patton's intense focus on his career and his harsh personality, Beatrice remained a steadfast partner throughout his military service. Patton's letters to her, often filled with affection and concern, reveal the softer side of a man whose public persona was often that of a hardened warrior. Beatrice also played a crucial role in managing the emotional aspects of Patton's life, supporting him through the most difficult and stressful periods of his career. Patton's love of horses was another significant aspect of his personal life. Growing up, he developed a deep connection to horses, and they remained an important part of his life throughout his career. He was an avid equestrian and often spent time horseback riding to clear his mind and relax. His love for horses was not just a personal passion, but also an extension of his military philosophy. He saw the horse as a symbol of speed, mobility, and strength, qualities he admired and wanted to incorporate into the strategies he developed for tank warfare. Despite his military genius, General Patton's personality and leadership style were far from perfect. His reputation for being fiercely abrasive, impatient, and uncompromising earned him both admirers and critics. His ability to inspire his troops was undeniable, but his harsh treatment of soldiers and his confrontational behavior often led to tension with those around him, both in and out of the military. Patton's most infamous controversy was the slapping incident during the Sicilian campaign in 1943. Patton, known for his fiery temper, slapped two soldiers suffering from battle fatigue, a condition later known as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and publicly berated them for what he perceived as cowardice. This action led to a massive public outcry and resulted in Patton being temporarily suspended from command. The incident tarnished his reputation and put his career in jeopardy. However, Patton's handling of the situation was typical of his leadership style. He saw weakness as unacceptable and believed that soldiers should demonstrate strength of character regardless of their emotional or psychological state. His actions during the slapping incident were part of his larger philosophy of toughness, and while his methods were seen as harsh, they were also intended to maintain a high standard of discipline and resilience within his ranks. Patton's public behavior was often controversial. He was outspoken in his views, not just about the conduct of the war, but about the leadership of his superiors. His disagreements with General Eisenhower and other top military leaders were well documented. Patton's famous disdain for bureaucracy and his unwillingness to adhere to military protocols earned him both respect and resentment from his fellow officers. While many saw Patton as a hero, others viewed him as a dangerous and reckless leader, willing to push his men to the brink of exhaustion and beyond. His insistence on aggressive warfare, combined with his harsh treatment of soldiers, led to criticism from those who believed he placed military success above the welfare of his troops. General George S. Patton's life came to a tragic and sudden end on December 21, 1945, just a few months after the defeat of Nazi Germany. He was involved in a car accident while traveling to his headquarters in Heidelberg, Germany. The accident left him paralyzed from the neck down, and despite receiving medical treatment, Patton died from his injuries. The circumstances surrounding his death were mysterious, with some speculating that it may have been more than just an accident. There have been many theories about the cause of Patton's death. Some believed that it was an assassination, possibly orchestrated by those who felt threatened by his outspoken views, especially his criticism of the Soviet Union. However, there is no conclusive evidence to support these claims, and most historians accept that his death was a tragic accident. Patton's sudden death at the age of 60 left the world in shock. He had been at the peak of his career, with the war in Europe over and his influence at its height. His passing robbed the U.S. Army of one of its most brilliant minds, and it left a void in the leadership of the Western world. Patton's death, so close to the end of the war, also prevented him from seeing the consequences of his post-war ideas come to fruition. Patton was buried at the Luxembourg American Cemetery near the city of Luxembourg. The cemetery is home to the graves of more than 5,000 American soldiers who lost their lives in the European theater of World War II. Patton's grave, marked by a simple white headstone, remains one of the most visited sites in the cemetery. His burial at Luxembourg was symbolic. It marked the final resting place of a man who had been central to the liberation of Europe and the defeat of Nazi Germany. Patton's grave is not just a monument to his military accomplishments, it is a place of reflection. Visitors come to pay their respects to a man who embodied the spirit of American military resolve, who changed the course of history, and who inspired millions with his unwavering commitment to victory. Today, Patton's grave serves as a pilgrimage site for those who admire his courage, his brilliance, and his legacy. General George S. Patton was a complex figure whose contributions to military strategy, his pioneering use of tanks, and his visionary approach to warfare changed the face of battle. He was a man who led with unshakable confidence, demanding nothing less than victory from his soldiers. Yet, his personal flaws, his controversial behavior, his harsh treatment of soldiers, and his battles with superiors often overshadowed his brilliant military strategies. Patton's legacy endures not only in the tactics he pioneered, but in the very essence of his leadership. He defined what it meant to be a warrior leader, someone who was willing to go to any lengths to achieve victory, no matter the cost. His use of tanks in mobile warfare, his emphasis on speed, and his aggressive tactics reshaped modern warfare and continue to influence military leaders and scholars around the world. Patton's story is one of extremes: victory and failure, brilliance and controversy. His name will forever be synonymous with the American fighting spirit, and his legacy lives on in the men and women who continue to study his tactics, his leadership, and his commitment to victory. General George S. Patton may have passed away, but his impact on military strategy and American military history will never fade. General George S. Patton was arguably the first commander to truly revolutionize the role of tanks in modern warfare. While the concept of tanks was born during World War I, it was World War II where tanks took their rightful place as the primary weapon of combat. And Patton was at the forefront of that transformation. His understanding of mechanized warfare and the role of tanks was groundbreaking, pushing the boundaries of how military leaders would view armored units for generations. In contrast to the traditional use of tanks in World War I, where they were often treated as support units for infantry, Patton envisioned a role where tanks would lead assaults and create breakthroughs in the enemy's lines. His tactics involved using tanks to punch through fortified defenses, rather than using infantry to clear paths for tanks. This bold approach, which focused on mobility, speed, and surprise, was instrumental in the success of his campaigns, especially in North Africa and Europe. Patton's view of tanks as independent, fast-moving forces capable of maneuvering through enemy defenses was a significant departure from earlier tank doctrines. He believed that tanks should be used in a fast-paced offensive to keep the enemy on the defensive, preventing them from regrouping and launching counterattacks. This philosophy was first tested during the North African campaign, where Patton's tanks were deployed not just in traditional roles, but as the primary force that would break through German lines and exploit gaps in their defenses. When Patton was given command of the U.S. Third Army, he applied his ideas about tank warfare on a much larger scale. Following the Normandy invasion, Patton's Third Army spearheaded the Allied breakout from the beachhead and advanced deep into France. His forces covered more than 100 miles in just a matter of days, thanks to his innovative use of tanks. The Normandy breakout is one of the most iconic examples of Patton's ability to coordinate armored forces with other arms of the military, such as infantry, artillery, and air support, in order to create a rapid-moving assault. By integrating tanks into a broader operational strategy, Patton was able to keep the Germans off balance and exploit weaknesses in their defense lines. The result was the quick liberation of much of France and the beginning of the final march into Germany. Patton's use of combined arms tactics, integrating tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support, became a hallmark of his strategic innovations. He believed in making full use of all available resources to keep the enemy guessing and off balance, never allowing them to mount a coordinated counteroffensive. His leadership during the breakout from Normandy and subsequent campaigns through France showed the world the true potential of modern mechanized warfare. One of Patton's greatest accomplishments was his ability to expose the vulnerabilities of the German Wehrmacht. Early in the war, the Germans had established a reputation as an invincible fighting force. However, under Patton's leadership, the Allied forces began to turn the tide of battle in favor of the West. His strategic brilliance was most evident during key battles such as the Battle of the Bulge, where he countered a German offensive that threatened to split the Allied lines. The Battle of the Bulge in late 1944 was a test of both Patton's leadership and his tactical genius. When the Germans launched a surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest, hoping to retake key positions in Belgium, the Third Army was called upon to counterattack and relieve the besieged town of Bastogne. Despite being caught off guard and forced to fight in the brutal winter conditions, Patton's Third Army responded with a speed and precision that shocked the Germans. Patton's brilliance in logistics and coordination allowed him to move his forces over 150 miles in less than a week, something that was thought to be impossible in such dire conditions. His army's swift response ensured that Bastogne was relieved, and the Germans were forced into retreat, marking a decisive victory for the Allies. This battle demonstrated not only Patton's strategic ability to adapt to changing conditions, but also his emphasis on the importance of momentum in warfare, an idea that would continue to influence military tactics for generations. Despite his incredible success on the battlefield, General George S. Patton was a polarizing figure. His outspoken nature, brash demeanor, and often controversial opinions made him a difficult figure to manage. Patton's relationship with his superiors, particularly General Dwight D. Eisenhower, was often strained due to his inability to temper his aggressive opinions and disregard for military protocol. Patton was a man of extremes. On one hand, he was a brilliant military tactician, a visionary leader who understood the dynamics of modern warfare. On the other hand, his personality often led to conflict within the military hierarchy. His abrasive remarks about fellow commanders, his insistence on confrontation with the Soviet Union, and his refusal to embrace the idea of post-war cooperation with the USSR alienated many within the ranks. These tensions were most evident during the Sicilian campaign, when Patton's infamous slapping incident occurred, and his unrelenting behavior towards soldiers suffering from battle fatigue caused a scandal that temporarily sidelined him from command. Patton's approach to leadership, while undeniably effective in battle, was often harsh and uncompromising. His soldiers admired him for his courage and his confidence, but many of his fellow officers found his methods difficult to work with. Patton's visionary military mind was often overshadowed by his personal flaws and his controversial actions, particularly after the war when his political views began to cause friction with U.S. leadership. Patton's impact on military thought cannot be overstated. His ideas about tank warfare, combined arms operations, and rapid aggressive offensives have become central tenets of modern military doctrine. His strategies are still taught at military academies today, and his emphasis on decisive action continues to shape the way armies around the world approach conflict. Patton's work with tank divisions, particularly during the Normandy breakout, set the stage for future advancements in armored warfare. His emphasis on speed and maneuverability allowed the U.S. Army to exploit the weaknesses of the enemy in ways that had never been done before. Modern tank warfare, especially in terms of using speed to create openings in the enemy's defense, is rooted in Patton's teachings. Moreover, Patton's focus on combined arms and his understanding of how to integrate tanks, artillery, and infantry in coordinated offensives became the foundation for modern military operations. Today's NATO forces, as well as many other armies, still use his tactics when facing adversaries that require rapid, coordinated attacks to gain the upper hand. Patton's legacy extends far beyond his military achievements. In American culture, Patton became a symbol of uncompromising leadership and bravery. His boldness, his willingness to stand up for what he believed was right, and his unyielding commitment to victory made him an iconic figure, both in the military and in popular culture. The film Patton, which was released in 1970, is perhaps the most famous representation of his character. The film, which starred George C. Scott in the title role, depicted Patton as both a brilliant military leader and a flawed individual. The movie helped cement his place as one of the most iconic military figures in American history, and it brought his legendary personality to a wider audience. Patton's speeches, particularly his famous speech before the Battle of the Bulge, have been immortalized in popular culture. His ability to inspire his troops with powerful words, often filled with bravado and confidence, became an integral part of his legacy. His speeches are still quoted today, not just by military leaders, but by anyone who seeks inspiration in the face of adversity. Ultimately, General George S. Patton remains a complex hero, one whose leadership, vision, and determination helped change the course of World War II and who shaped the way we think about modern warfare. His contributions to tank warfare, his tactical brilliance, and his unwavering belief in the ability to win against overwhelming odds continue to inspire soldiers, leaders, and military historians around the world. His legacy is one of contradictions. He was a brilliant military commander whose excessive confidence and controversial personality made him a polarizing figure. But despite his flaws, his impact on military history is undeniable. The history of modern warfare is filled with moments where Patton's influence is still evident. Whether it was during World War II, the Cold War, or even modern conflicts, Patton's vision of leadership, combat, and determination continues to resonate today. General Patton was a leader who refused to back down, a warrior who never wavered in his pursuit of victory, and a man whose legacy remains a beacon for all those who seek to lead with courage and conviction. Patton's belief in immediate action against the Soviet threat during the early days of the Cold War remained a central theme of his military thinking. While the rest of the Allies focused on the rehabilitation of post-war Europe, and the need for a diplomatic approach, Patton's vision was more pragmatic and aggressive. He saw the Cold War as not just an ideological conflict, but a military confrontation that would shape the future of global politics. Patton's desire to continue fighting against the Soviet Union, even after Nazi Germany was defeated, was motivated by his firm belief that Stalin had expansionist ambitions. Unlike many of his peers, Patton saw the Soviet Union as a continuation of the Nazi threat, one that could eventually undermine the democratic principles that the Allies had fought to defend. He was critical of the idea of appeasing the USSR, seeing it as an inevitability that would only prolong global instability. Patton argued for preemptive action and advocated for an immediate confrontation with the Soviets while their forces were still weakened. He had no illusions about the Soviet regime's ambitions and believed that ignoring this threat would lead to devastating consequences for the West. However, this stance earned him the disfavor of many in the post-war administration, including key figures like General Eisenhower and President Truman, who felt the priority should be economic reconstruction and global cooperation. Patton's advocacy for an early confrontation with the Soviet Union was considered too radical for the diplomatic climate of the post-war years. His views, while not widely accepted at the time, would later be echoed during the Cold War, as the U.S. and its allies found themselves locked in a decades-long standoff with the Soviet Union. Patton's belief in direct action and military superiority would be embraced, albeit under very different circumstances, as the world entered the Cold War era. After World War II, Patton was moved from one post to another, his role increasingly diminishing in the eyes of the military and political elite. Despite his monumental success on the battlefield, his opinions on the post-war order were viewed as inconvenient, even dangerous. His outspoken nature, particularly his criticism of Soviet policy and his pro-German stance, put him at odds with the administration. His comments were increasingly seen as politically inappropriate and a threat to the stability of the fragile international peace. In the months following the end of the war, Patton was removed from his command of the Third Army and appointed as the military governor of Bavaria. His role in overseeing the post-war occupation of Germany was controversial, as he publicly advocated for a lenient approach toward the German people. His belief that Germany should be rebuilt rather than punished put him in direct conflict with the denazification efforts led by the Allies. While other military leaders were focused on dismantling Nazi structures and purging former Nazis from positions of power, Patton's preference for rebuilding German infrastructure and industry was seen as naive and dangerous. Patton's insistence that Germany's military forces be preserved to counter Soviet aggression was a belief that would resonate more loudly in the years after his death. In the face of an emerging Soviet threat, Patton's ideas would eventually gain recognition, particularly in the strategic thinking of the U.S. Army during the Cold War. General Patton's tactical use of tank divisions and his emphasis on mechanized warfare reshaped the way wars were fought. His strategic brilliance in World War II demonstrated the effectiveness of fast-moving armored units capable of penetrating enemy lines, disrupting supply chains, and wreaking havoc in enemy rear areas. Patton's belief in combined arms warfare, where tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support work seamlessly together, was revolutionary and would go on to define modern military operations. His vision for armored warfare was clear. Tanks were not to be used as support units, but as the primary offensive weapon capable of breaking enemy lines and creating disarray within their ranks. Speed and mobility were his core principles, and the Third Army's rapid advance through France and Germany is a testament to this ideology. Post-World War II, Patton's tank tactics became central to U.S. military doctrine. The idea of fast, mobile, and overwhelming armored units became a hallmark of the Cold War strategy. Even during the Vietnam War, the use of tank units for rapid mobility was a direct legacy of Patton's vision. Although the specific type of warfare evolved, the core principles of mobility, speed, and combined arms coordination that Patton championed were at the heart of U.S. military operations for decades. Patton's influence also extended to the design of modern armored vehicles. The M48 Patton tank, named after him, became a symbol of American armored might during the 1950s and 1960s, showcasing the enduring impact of his ideas on the design and use of military hardware. The M48, much like the tanks Patton led in battle, was built to be both agile and heavily armored, designed for the fast-moving, combat-focused strategy Patton had promoted. Patton's views on the post-war world were shaped by a mixture of his military experience and his unique perspective on global politics. As an officer in World War II, Patton was keenly aware of the global dynamics at play and recognized the need for immediate action to stabilize Europe and prevent Soviet encroachment. However, his methods for achieving peace were in stark contrast to the diplomatic approach embraced by the rest of the Allies. He was an advocate for the restoration of Germany's power as a necessary counterbalance to Soviet expansion in Europe. Patton felt strongly that a weak Germany would be a destabilizing force in Europe, and that the only way to secure long-term peace was to empower Germany economically and militarily to act as a buffer against Soviet aggression. In this, he took a much more pragmatic view than the U.S. government, which prioritized denazification and the punishment of the Axis powers. Patton's beliefs on the restoration of Germany and the future of Europe were tied to his strategic vision for maintaining the balance of power in Europe. He opposed the idea of a divided Germany, viewing the partitioning of the country as a strategic mistake that would only weaken Europe and make it more susceptible to Soviet control. Although his views on the matter were largely dismissed at the time, they would later be echoed by policymakers in the early stages of the Cold War as Germany became a key player in the NATO alliance. While Patton was undoubtedly a brilliant military strategist, he was also a deeply complex and often contradictory figure. His personal life and beliefs reflected a man constantly at war with himself. On one hand, he believed in the toughness of the soldier, believing that only the strongest would survive the rigors of battle. On the other hand, he was deeply religious and often turned to his faith for strength in times of personal crisis. Patton's love for horses and his connection to the natural world were some of the few things that brought him peace outside of war. His passion for equestrianism was more than just a pastime. It was a reminder of his family's aristocratic roots and a way for him to stay grounded amidst the chaos of war. This personal connection to horses and his frequent retreats to the countryside for horseback riding showcased a side of Patton rarely seen by the public, a more contemplative, introspective side. However, Patton's abrasive personality and his belief in victory at any cost often created friction with others. His clashes with fellow officers, his disregard for military protocol, and his stubborn refusal to follow orders, particularly regarding his views on Germany, led to a sense of political isolation after the war. Even so, Patton's strength of character, relentless drive, and visionary military tactics ensured that his legacy would survive long after his death. General George S. Patton's cultural influence extended far beyond the military. His life, his victories, and his controversial opinions have become integral parts of American history and culture. He remains one of the most iconic military figures in modern history. The 1970 film Patton, starring George C. Scott, was a critical success and a definitive portrayal of the general's character. The film not only depicted his military achievements, but also portrayed his complex personality, showcasing both his brilliance and his flaws. The film's famous opening speech, in which Patton addresses his troops with fiery rhetoric, became an iconic moment in cinematic history and has since been referenced in various forms of media. Patton's portrayal in popular culture helped solidify his place as a symbol of American strength and leadership. The general's persona became one of bravery, vision, and uncompromising leadership, qualities that continue to inspire both military personnel and civilians alike. General George S. Patton may have been a controversial figure, but his legacy as a military leader, tactician, and visionary is undeniable. From his early days in the U.S. cavalry to his groundbreaking work with tank warfare in World War II, Patton's contributions to military history changed the course of the war and shaped the future of modern combat. His influence continues to be felt today, not just in military circles, but in popular culture and leadership philosophy. General Patton remains a symbol of unyielding commitment, bold leadership, and strategic brilliance, whose contributions to warfare and leadership will be studied for generations to come. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life and legacy of one of history's greatest military leaders. We hope you've enjoyed learning about General George S. Patton, a man who was as complex as the wars he fought and whose legacy will never fade. Thank you for watching. If you found General George S. Patton's story inspiring, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible tales from history. Patton's leadership and personality shaped not only World War II, but also the way we think about military leadership and tactics today. Let us know your thoughts on General Patton. Was he a military genius or a controversial figure? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the warriors who changed the world.